I'm going to get us started, and then actually Yen Yen is going to follow me, and then followed by Kala. And we're going to explore the meanings of literacy. All you have to do is think about checking your phone or checking your iPad to know that literacy today is changing from the way we have traditionally thought about literacy, and we're going to explore that. So, how do you get two 4-year-olds to behave during the wedding reception? This is the flower girl and the ring bearer. The ring bearer is my great-nephew, Colin. And the new social network suggests that all of these interactions are mediated by technologies. And these two 4-year-olds enjoyed themselves very much and allowed their parents to enjoy the wedding reception by playing and sharing nicely their iPad. So the children are way ahead of us. Today I'm going to use this book. Some of you know the book Goodnight Moon. How many of you know the book Goodnight Moon and have fond memories? It's a bedtime storybook, right? Goodnight Moon. It's all about saying goodnight to everything in the room and a little old lady whispering hush so the children can go to bed. Well, there is a parody that's come out called Goodnight iPad. And I have a book trailer. You now have book trailers like movie trailers. And I'm going to play just a little bit so that you get the feel of this book. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more about literacy. So here we go.
In a world where a little old lady whispering hush would never be heard, comes a book for our time.
In the bright, buzzing room, there was an iPad and a kid playing Doom. And a screensaver of a bird launching over the moon. And there were 3 little nooks with 10,000 books. And a huge LCD, Wi-Fi, HD TV. With Bose 5.1, 6 remotes, and 3D. And a BlackBerry ringing with Eminem singing. And a new Facebook friend. And texts with no end. And a viral clip of a cat doing flips, and the bings, bongs, and beeps of emails and tweets, and a fed-up old woman who was trying to sleep. Good night, iPad. Good night, Doom. Good night, bird launching over the moon. Good night, nooks and digital books. Good night, Eminem. Good night, Facebook friend. Good night, LOLs. Good night, MP3s. Good night, LCD, Wi-Fi, HD TV. Good night, remotes and Netflix streams. Androids, apps, and glowing screens. Good night, plugs and power lights that guide us to pee in the darkness of night. Good night, buzzing. Good night, beeps. Good night, everybody who should be asleep. Good night, pop stars. Good night, MacBook Air. Good night, gadgets everywhere.
Watch this last slide. Okay. So we could probably spend a lot of time talking about all the forms of literacy that we could recognize in that iPad. But I'm showing you this book and this little book trailer because I think this is a new genre of book that is complaining about the changes in literacy. Not so happy with all of the texting and the tweeting and the noises, and the little old lady just wants to sleep. And the end of the last image in the book is the one I have before you, in which you see the little old lady doing a bedtime story reading of the children with the flashlight under the covers, reading Goodnight Moon. And I would submit to you that this represents an image of nostalgia for the way literacy has always been, and a disdain or perhaps just a questioning of what literacy is becoming and the concern about it. We often have a panic over popular culture and what's happening. So I think this book, these two books, Goodnight Moon and Goodnight iPad, can serve as metaphors for how literacy is changing today. And so I've called one of them, Goodnight Moon, a literacy 1.0, the way we think of Web 1.0, and Goodnight iPad represents a changing meaning of literacy which people have called Literacy 2.0 after Web 2.0. And I want to briefly just highlight a few dimensions. It's not simply that one is using technology, because books are an old-fashioned technology. The differences have to do with some of the things that I've highlighted here. One is the focus of the Goodnight Moon book reading is individual reading of a printed text. In school, a focus is also of a conventional notion of literacy is a teacher-to-student feedback. It's unidirectional, with the idea that the children are receiving knowledge from these books. And of course, I would say that that can still happen in any kind of context. But in contrast to that, people, theorists, and researchers have been talking about what's different about literacy today and what the technology affords. And one of the main things that it affords is multimodality, the use of multiple modes of meaning making. Sound, animation, color, images, photographs, design. We couldn't do that before we had computers. It's a click and drag technology that 4-year-olds can manage, as you could see from the first slide that I showed. So that's my second point, multimodality as opposed to simply print-based text. But the first point is really the highlight, the one I want to highlight today, which is that there's a new ethos today around literacy, and that ethos is a participatory, collaborative one. The idea that we're not just going to the web anymore to get information, but we now go to participate and make content, not just take content from the web. So that's why you now have highlight features of literacy as being about collaboration, feedback from diverse publics, networks, collaborators. The whole notion of a network means that it's not a one-to-one or somebody speaking to many, but everybody can participate. And finally, the idea is that people can create knowledge together through this network. So again, literacy is not just the introduction of the computer technology, it also comes with a new ethos. And so I'm going to leave you to think about these two ideas about literacy and how it's changing. And especially we want to ask about whether it's changing in schools or not. One is the Goodnight Moon version of literacy, in which literacy is reading, writing, listening, and speaking about print-based texts. And the other, represented by Goodnight iPad, is that literacy is interpreting and designing multimodal text to participate in social networks. And with that, I am going to turn things over to Yan Wu, who's going to show us what a 4-year-old can do.
And so I've gone on to become a professor of education and make films. And the other part of my life is I'm a publisher and writer. So I published something called Dim Sum Warriors. You can see the print book over there. In its first iteration, when Dim Sum Warriors first came out, it was it was on the iPad first. It's an interactive bilingual iPad app. So basically, it's the first comic book app where if you tap on the word balloon, you can hear it in English. And if you tap and hold, you can hear translations in Chinese and read it in Chinese as well. So part of the reason why I developed that is because it's for my daughter, really. And this was her when she was really little, and my daughter, so I'm originally from Singapore, and she's growing up in the US. So I wanted some kind of representation of her view of the world, or her, because she's both East and West. She connects the East and the West, and she's bilingual, and she moves easily between those two languages. So part of the reason for the iPad app is to see herself represented in culturally. So this is the cover of Dim Sum Warriors. It's the story of 3 young dumplings who fight a pot of evil instant ramen. Because we know how evil ramen is, even though it's delicious. I'm going to show you this little video of her interacting with the iPad app.
Ow! I'll definitely give the dummy back to you, but I don't know how to. As you wish. Chamai! Whoosh! Ah, 如你所愿。Chamai! 喂嘘！嗨！
go to this one. See this one, the corner? The corner? Press the corner square. See the corner square? Okay, press it. Okay, we change to English. There you go.
Stop! Hey! Wait! Hi! Glad to be of help. Let me also relieve you of this burdensome dog. Ow, 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 hot sticker, please put me down.
Why is he saying ow, ow, ow?
Because his punch pulling his
Oh, okay.
Ow, 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 hot sticker, please put me down.
say spot sticker. Please put me down.
Glad to be of help. Let me also relieve you of this burdensome dog.
What did he say?
The pot sticker?
Yeah.
He said, glad to be of help. Like, I'm glad to help you. Let me also relieve you. Relieve you means take away so that it's not so heavy for you. This burdensome doll means the doll is very heavy. So he said, I'll take it away from you.
Yeah, but Xiaoqiao would not find him. So nice. So she's being told what's she doing?
That's pot sticker, right? Pot sticker is a nasty one, isn't he?
Yeah.
What's he doing to Shamai?
She's trying somewhere way to hurt, and so he thinks somebody doesn't need to be with Xiaoqiao anymore.
Yeah.
I'm gonna pause this first and show you. So in that video, what I didn't show you was her switching between languages and so on. But you can see how she's protective of the space. She's learning independently. She can't read the print book, but she can read the iPad book. And she's reconstructing the narrative. It's not a passive reading. She's constantly thinking as she's reading. I'm going to show you another video of her. This is 3.5 years old, where she's making TV. So she's watching TV and she's trying to make TV. Oh, how do I play it? Just click. I'll try that.
What are you working on?
At 11 p.m. at night, she suddenly got the idea that she wanted me to cut a hole out of a box so she could make TV. So this is her trying to make TV.
Remember the ugly duckling?
What's this for? What are you working on?
The ugly duckling. The ugly duckling. And the three forecasts. And in the back, there's a lot of duckling. Wow. And the mother duck said, you better hurry up, because the ugly duckling might visit.
She said, you better hurry up because the ugly duckling might visit. She's drawing the ugly duckling. Yeah. She wants to go to work, but she can't because she's got to stay behind for the ugly duckling.
Do I need to turn the TV on?
So she thinks the TV is not on, so she has talking. I'm about to ask her whether there's a theme song to this TV show. And you see her, I was surprised that instead of just singing the theme song, she drew the theme song. So you're going to see it in a moment. So my husband saying maybe it's just a noisy duckling, it's not an ugly duckling. I was just asking her whether there's a theme song to the cartoon. So she thinks there's a theme song. I asked for permission to show this to you, by the way, and she said.
Multimodality.
So music becomes visually represented for her. And she's going to draw the quacks of the, now she's into sound, so she's going to draw the quacks of the duck after this. That's all the music, yeah. Now the ugly duckling sound, she says. Okay, I'm going to pause this. So things that I think it's, she moves easily between visual and sound, and it's been fascinating. And when what drawing allows us to do is to express very complex thoughts that she can't, what art allows us to do is to express complex thoughts that she can't do in print. She doesn't know how to write. So in this picture, she loves the Powerpuff Girls. Does anyone know the Powerpuff Girls? Yay. Very well-written series, and apparently 20 years old now. So she loves the Powerpuff Girls, and in this picture that she drew, this was about 3 months ago she drew this. She just turned 4, so just before she turned 4. So she said, Buttercup is dead, but she's smiling. And the reason Buttercup is dead because Buttercup realizes, Buttercup is the most violent and aggressive of the Powerpuff Girls. And she says Buttercup realizes that fighting is bad, so she stopped fighting, and because of that she got killed. But she's smiling because she knows she's doing the right thing by not fighting. And she says Blossom and Bubbles don't know that fighting is bad, so they want to go back to fighting, and they're very unhappy. And those two are the doctors, nurses, so they have that representation of health, someone in healthcare, someone from the hospital. So it's a very complex thought and a feeling about death and understanding about fighting and peace and death that she's communicating in this picture, that she, without drawing, she couldn't tell me this thought. This is the Powerpuff Girls again with Professor Utonium. And I had asked her what that thought balloon is. She says she's, actually Blossom is very worried that Bubbles will laugh at her. So she's afraid that Blossom will laugh at her. So that's her fear, that Bubbles will laugh at her. This is the first time that I saw her doing sequential art in a story. So these are characters from the Dim Sum Warriors that she likes drawing. So the middle is Roast Pork Bao, so Porky Bao. And she says that Roast Pork Bao is very afraid that his friends are becoming evil. So the two friends are becoming evil. And Xiao Mai and Xia Jiao, they are both shrimp dumplings. So his dumpling friends are going to save him. And they are superheroes because they wear capes. And they're going to fly to him to save him from his evil friends. And this is Xia Jiao fighting the evil friend to save Roast Pork. So these three pictures are sequential art. So she's beginning to put together a story of sequential art. And this is a character that she created called Billy, whose clothes are being dried, so she's naked. This is a new character that she created. It's a Japanese superhero character. And this is our home. She says that the building on the left is our home, the building in the middle is our old office, and the building on the right is our new office and yoga studio, because we have a new yoga studio now. And she's up there encouraging me as I do yoga. And that's her nanny trying to get into the yoga studio. And this is her representation of our family. So it's a feeling about us. You know, that we're hugging and carrying her. Look at her feet dangling there. The implications of this is that we are a family where we don't have any limits on screen time. We have absolutely no limits on screen time, because what we are feeling and understanding is actually she is making a lot of stuff. Whatever she watches, she is translating into making. And I feel that the making is actually making her very critical of what she sees. So she doesn't assume that the media that she sees is just made. She feels that everything has a process of making, and she can change that, and she can rewrite that, she can reimagine that. And for me, that is the beginnings of the critical thinking and kind of reading the world around her very differently. So thanks.
And I'm going to just share a little piece of my journey with you in entering this field, actually a couple of fields really, because I don't have any, I haven't done research in literacy studies prior to this. And my role has been to prepare students, our teachers here, pre-service teachers, to become teachers of students with disabilities, or to work in inclusive classrooms where there are students with disabilities. And one of the things that I've been finding, or one of the areas that's been of particular interest to me, both in my research and in my work in schools, has been around the use of technology. So I found this sort of connection here, especially after having some very generative conversations with Marjorie, around how, how literacy studies could actually help and support the use of assistive technology and just generally technology-based supports for a variety of kids in our schools. And so that's what drew me in here. And so it's the promise of technology, what technology can do and how it can transform learning, as Yenin has shown through her video clips, and how it can change the ways we think about ourselves, right? That promise, to me, has yet to be actualized and realized for a lot of our kids, especially kids with disabilities and other kids from, various groups, including kids who are struggling, kids who are at risk for failures, English language learners. So there's so many groups of kids. And so why hasn't this promise of technology actually been realized? I guess that's what really drew me into this whole area of work. And but I still am very much, I admit, an outsider to this whole field of technology, right? I think about my daughter, and she's been text messaging since she was 9. She's been working with Google Docs and Google extensions and photo booth and PowerPoints, and she can find the best app for me right now that can help me make international text messaging and without paying a dime, and all of that before she's 13 or 14. So she's the insider. And most of our kids in our schools today are the insiders, right? And so here I am as a researcher preparing my teachers, pre-service teachers, to become teachers of kids with disabilities and prepare teachers who will work with the insiders. I have to find a way to enter this field. So what I'm doing today is to share a little bit, a snapshot of that journey for you, and sort of work my way through to help you and me understand why I'm doing what I'm doing. So the very first place I begin, I have to start with why. Why do we need to use technology, technology-based supports for our students? Is it simply the promise of technology, the fact that it can do these wonderful things, that it can promise these great outcomes? Is that a good enough reason for why we need to even use technology? And just to explain, sort of illustrate the significance of that question, or to me the importance of the question, let me give an example. I'm working with a student right now. She's a high schooler. Let's call her Miranda. Miranda is a Latina 16-year-old high schooler, very eager to learn, very motivated. She loves technology. Creates her own song productions. Has a very supportive family who wants to encourage her interest in technology. She also happens to have cerebral palsy. She's a wheelchair user. and she's had struggles with reading for many years now. So right now she's in high school, she's a 10th grader, and I find when I started getting to know her right around this time, and I learned that when she was in elementary school, she was given a laptop, a Mac, and loaded with some really cool technological tools, right? So she has software that will convert anything that's text on screen to speech so she can hear whatever she reads. She has software that allows her to speak, and that will immediately convert it into text, right? So speech to text, and that can be sent as an email attachment to her teacher, so she doesn't have to write per se, she can simply talk. There's also technology that will help her to grow in her writing skills and her composition, because then it does a kind of prediction as she writes. So it's sort of like when you're doing your text messaging and you get all these, it prompts you to say one word or the other, and you realize by mistake that you have pressed spacebar and allowed it to say something never really intended to say in the first place, all the kind of things that happen. But really it's word prediction, right, that she's able to accomplish, and that helps her in doing her writing. So she's got all these fabulous, this package, right, of tools. And so that can help her with literacy grow. So I'm thinking, where is she right now? Right? She's in 10th grade. And with all of that software that she's had for over 6-7 years now, she hasn't participated in any statewide testing. She's not planning to take the Regents. That's not in her future as far as her educators and everybody, all the adults around her are concerned. And the teachers whom she works with, I'm not quite sure. They don't really have many aspirations for her for the next 3 or 4 years, or even the next 3 or 4 months. So how do we get here? So there's something about trying to bring technology to our students and realizing the promise of technology, but also can be challenging or can have implicit dangers that we may not be aware of. And it's not that I want to say that Yen Yen is unaware of these dangers. It's just simply that's the line that I'm taking right now to understand why we do need to go in the direction that she's just illustrated. So what is this danger that seems to happen every time I step on this well? There's a danger that, I know, that is. So what happens with Miranda here, right? It's, when it's not producing the results that people expect. So what do you think we do? What do you think people do first? Where do they go first? Right? Do they start looking at the technology? Maybe. But they first start saying, what's wrong with the student? Oh, Miranda's too lazy. Miranda, she forgets to take the computer out when she comes to class. Or, she really doesn't spend enough time getting to know the software. So what's happening here is that the technology and the tool, or the promise of the technology remains intact. No one's looking at that. We're now beginning to find the flaw in the student, right, in Miranda. And so we've moved from thinking about how technology can be so powerful and empowering for the student to sort of blaming the student for not realizing the potential of technology. For too long, the education of kids with disabilities has been about finding the problem with them. And so when I started looking into literacy studies and trying to bring about a connection between assistive technology and literacy studies, I wanted to make sure it would help me do a couple of things, right? It would help me first sort of find a way whereby I can look at practices or look at the instructional practices that locate the problem in the student and sort of shift away from that. So we deflect attention away from the student and what the student brings to see, now, does this instructional environment really, is it capable of receiving differences, of receiving diverse learners? That has to be the goal. So that was what I wanted to make sure that my exploration of this field would allow me to do. So, but what does, situating technology, right, in literacy studies, what will it really allow me to accomplish? What does it really let me do? So now, it provides me with a very convenient backdoor. I can now look at this whole terrain of technology or assistive technology and use that as a way to deepen understandings of equity and inclusive education. So I can talk about how all kids need to participate equitably in the classroom, right? And so technology really becomes valuable for that. But the more important thing is I can do that without having to take sides, without having to look at the divisions between people, and look instead at coalitional spaces, because people bring different understandings of disability. People bring different understandings of the capabilities of children. And so I don't want to locate myself on one side or the other. I don't want to work with divisions. I want to work with coalitional spaces. And so assistive technology, or technology in connection with literacy studies, allows me to engage in that kind of space where I'm not forcing myself to think about ideological differences, but some of the shared commonalities. We all want our kids to benefit from and grow with the use of technology that Yanni just illustrated. I want to be able to do that. So instead of going and talking to Miranda's educators and telling them like, I think you have a flawed conception of disability. I'm not going to do that. I could do that, but I'm not going to do that, right? Instead, I'm going to engage with her and the other teachers to try and see how can we bring technology into the classroom in a way that can benefit her own pedagogy and benefit all the kids in those classrooms. And many of those kids do have intellectual disabilities, so they could all participate in it. So it's taking care of Miranda, yes, but also working with the educators there in ways that can expand their own pedagogical practices. So in a sense, what I'm trying to do here, it's a very ambitious agenda, but certainly it's something I can, I think I am trying to do, is to bridge academic communities. There is, traditional, typical ways of thinking about education of kids with disabilities that's often premised on locating the problem within the student. And I'm trying to suggest that there are other groups who will talk about alternative paradigms where disability is not a flaw, it's not a deficit. It's just a natural variation of the human experience. It's an integral part of human experience. But rather than locking myself into one position or the other, I can find the space through the connection between technology and literacy studies to really engage with more coalitional work and to engage with practitioners in the field, right? So what is it about literacy studies that really helps me do that? This is the meat of the stuff. And again, I want to acknowledge my work, my conversations with Marjorie to help me think through some of this stuff, since it is a new field for me. So why do I find this so helpful? Well, the very first piece of it, and this is what Marjorie said in some very, really clean and explicit ways right up in her earlier slides, that it really emphasizes sociocultural nature of all learning. So learning is not something that just takes place in the head of the learner. It's not happening over here alone. It's really happening in the interaction with people in your environment, right? With peers, with teachers, and not just with the social dynamics. It also implicates your pedagogical practices. The routines in your schools and your classrooms. It implicates labeling processes. All of that is implicated in the ways students come to demonstrate their learning, right? So that piece of literacy studies really appeals to me in trying to do this work around, to accomplish my aims. The second piece of it is the focus around identity, right? For too long, kids with disabilities and their families, their voices have been considered to be less important, and most of the work that's been done in supporting the education often comes from non-disabled researchers and practitioners, and so their voices, the voices of kids with disabilities, the families, is much less heard. So now what I can do is I can find out more about what does Miranda think about the technology that's being used. How does it support her? Well, how does it accomplish her aims? Is it helping her? And so by privileging her voice and the voice of her family, then I give her a way by which they become then the knowledgeable experts. So the experts are not just the professionals and the researchers. She becomes an expert as well. So critical literacy helps me do that. And the third piece that both Marjorie and Yanni have illustrated again is the issue of multimodality. And multimodality really, really works for me in trying to establish accessibility. That's a word that's often associated with disability. And the more you think about it, it's really used a lot in some very probably narrow ways, right? When you think about education, all education is about access. We want all our kids to access learning in ways that they can develop and grow and acquire those different kinds of concepts that are necessary for them to succeed. So all education really is about access. But the ways in which we think about accessibility now has sort of become rather narrow. We talk about, is this event accessible? Is this room accessible? Are these PowerPoints accessible? So in other words, we're suggesting, is it accessible to a certain group of people? And while that is important, it sort of sidesteps another important question is, when we design these rooms, these spaces, these buildings in the first place, who did we really have in mind? Did we not have in mind all these other groups for whom we now need to create access? So that's the larger and more complicated understandings of, or complex understandings of access, which way we need to go. But even at this point, multimodality still helps me deepen that conversation around access. So it's not simply about, here's a tool, now use it, now you have access to the information, right? That's what probably happened to Miranda many years ago. But now it's really about also, through these kinds of multimodal experiences, can we now work towards intellectual access? How is Miranda using that information to learn, to grow? How is that information being presented through these various tools in order for her to learn? So this intellectual access is also equally important. And then and beyond that, what is Miranda doing with this stuff, with this information that she's accessing? Can she connect with her peers readily? Is she able to connect with peer groups and other groups that she wants to be a part of? Is it giving her social access, in other words? So the whole conversation around accessibility can really be deepened through the linkages with multimodality. And that's what I found so empowering as well. So these are the different ways by which I've tried to really come to understand literacy studies and find the ways by which I can make the connections to assistive technology or just technology-based supports for our students with disabilities in order to ground them in the work that teachers do in their classrooms and make them understand the power of technology. But even as much as I enjoy doing that, and I have done that, I want to also remain cognizant, and I'm losing time, 1 minute, okay, on some of the challenges that face me, and as I do this, and one is certainly becoming knowledgeable about technologies, not only for students with disability, but all the million apps that are out there, because you never know which app there can really be, can be useful for a student with disability. It doesn't have to be only designed for a student with disability. So becoming knowledgeable, and what I do is I collaborate a lot with practitioners, very creative and talented technology specialists, who can always remind me about the promise of technology and what it can do, and then my role is to then take it to the classroom, right? And then to become fluent in this literature, which is outside my comfort zone, completely outside my comfort zone, but I have to work with that. And finally, I think probably the most difficult part for me is to remain this rather ambivalent space that this leaves me, because the whole work around equity and equity in education is often connected to, we often are attached to some very strong political and ideological positions, and here what I'm suggesting is something quite different. I'm suggesting we need to move through many positions and not remain entrenched in one or the other. And that kind of movement, even though it's theoretically sound, I draw a lot on feminist work to do that, even though it's theoretically sound, it doesn't have a whole lot of glamour, and it's much harder to do. And so it does leave me feeling very much confused, really, and also wondering whether I'm on the right path. But at the same time, it's not about compromise, and it's what I say, it reminds me that I need to always be vigilant about knowing why I do what I do. And that's the piece I've tried to explain to you today, and I hope I made